So welcome everybody. My name is Judy Utall. I'm the president of the Orange County Asperger Support Group. We are a group that's focused on helping teens, adults, and their families who are dealing with high functioning autism or Asperger's. We provide support through three ways. One is we have social activities. There's a lot going on there, and I'll quickly share our calendar. We do it through support. We have a lot of different support meetings, and I'll share some of those on the calendar. And then we do it through education. And today is part of our education series. So we have Dr. Gantman here, who we've had a long relationship with, and he's here every quarter to meet with folks, but we always like to kick off the year with him. Alex, before we get started, I'm going to share a few things and then we'll transition to you. So one of the things we're doing this year is we're hosting an Autism and Entertainment conference. And we got a grant from the Department of Developmental Services and we're accepting applications now. This is for people who are interested in a career in entertainment who have already gone through the training. So if you're just someone who's who's just interested, likely you will not get accepted to the conference. It's going to be strictly for people who have gone to programs, Exceptional Minds, maybe they studied film in school, those type of people. But one of the things I wanted to share is a short video. And the reason I wanted to share this is Alex and I every year figure out what he's going to talk about at the beginning of the year. And sometimes he has a lot of choices, and sometimes I said, I really want you to cover this. This particular topic, I think, is really important because in my role as president, I see a lot of different people. I see a lot of people succeeding, and that always fills my heart with joy. But sometimes I see people scared to try, okay? They're scared to try it, and they're fearful of failing. And when that happens, you can't succeed because you haven't tried. So I wanted to share this video. It's with Danny Bowman. Danny, you may recognize her from Love on the Spectrum. She is going to be speaking at our conference, and we shot a number of these videos that we call Spectrum Spotlight videos that are shot by an autistic crew about autistic people. And I really think that this video about Danny is really helpful because she gives 10 keys to success a little bit later in the video. And I think you will learn a lot from that.
Hi, I am Deanie Bowman, founder and CEO of Deanimation Entertainment, an animation company that I started in 2009, and I also happen to be on the autism spectrum. Being an animator has always been part of who I am, and I evolved to also become an educator. When I was 3 years old, before I could speak, my parents had an abundant collection of VHS tapes of animated movies. I used to pause the VHS a second forward each time, rewind it, and play the clip again. So I decided to try it with my plush toys and a camera by moving them and taking a picture. Move them, take a picture, move them, take another picture. Then I would ask my parents to develop the film. When I would get the film back, I would flip it like a flip book. Right here I have a flip book example. A wonky face. At age 11, when I moved in with my aunt and uncle, I showed them my picture books and animation that I had been working on just by using PowerPoint, MS Paint, and Adobe Photoshop. The first animation software I was introduced to by my uncle was Toon Boom Studio, which gave me the idea to start an animation company. I was just 11, and I didn't understand the reality of being my own boss. However, my aunt and uncle did take me seriously and helped me develop my company by helping me create a website. But I needed my aunt and uncle as my team to make it happen because nobody does it alone. It's important to have a team. Since then, I've received a BFA in animation in 2018 and an MBA in global strategy and leadership in 2020. One of the challenges was, first of all, learning to accept my autism. Growing up, I was not told that I have autism. I didn't know what that was until age 11 when I moved in with my aunt and uncle. It was a blessing because I could do all these amazing things I probably would not be able to do if it wasn't for my autism. Well, first of all, if somebody would like to pursue a career, it could be animation or anything, there is no age limit. I started my company when I was 14 years old. Second, it's okay to ask for help. Nobody does it alone. Get a strong team behind you of people that really believe in you and your mission, just like my aunt and uncle who believed in my mission. Third, remember to get out of your comfort zone. Push yourself because nobody is going to do it for you. I know it's difficult for me to push myself as well, but that's part of growing up. Diligence and organization are the keys to a successful independent living adult. Also remember, it's not only about the more you learn, the more you earn. Apply what you learn. If you're striving to get a degree based on your passion, it's more than about getting straight A's in class. However, don't fear failure. Everyone fails at one time or another. And that's part of the learning process. No matter how bad failure may feel, you must keep trying as long as you can. Don't compare yourself to others. Everyone has different career paths. That is the reason why you must find your passion first. And always be grateful for what you already have, and you will attract more good things. And take advantage of many networking opportunities depending on your passion and field. Take classes outside of college based on your passion and go to conferences and events. Don't listen to the naysayers. Just because they said you cannot do this or you cannot do that, just look straight at them and say, yes, I can and I will, just watch me. First, being part of the entire animation process and seeing the final product. And I enjoyed watching my students that I teach at animation workshops unleash their creativity by creating their short films. I love going and being part of animation events, like film screenings, panels, and conventions, locally and around the country. The superpowers I possess is the ability to hyper-focus and to stay on task. I also have the eagle eyes to see any small details. I have a passion of endless research and the ability to communicate the same language as my autistic peers. Not literally, what I mean the same level of communication and sharing common interests in animation.
Well, thank you, Judy. I think this video was excellent. It was a perfect way to transition into our presentation today. Actually, I'm glad that it's kind of raining outside. It's a perfect time to cozy up and sit in front of your computer and talk about a wonderful subject such as fear of failure. No, the joke is that we definitely all are afraid sometimes to fail. And so, just like Danny was saying, that one of the most important things you must do is to continue to push yourself and make sure that you do not sort of fall prey to other people's opinions and ideas. And just you have to believe in yourself. But we'll all come back to that once we talk a little bit more about fear of failure. But as I said, today we're going to talk about fear of failure and its relation to autism. But we'll talk in the beginning about mostly how neurotypical individuals are experiencing fear of failure. And then we'll talk about, in addition to that, because there's a significant overlap with individuals on the spectrum, what are some of the more specific things that we see in the population as well. Well, let's talk about fear of failure. So the actual term for it is what's called atikiphobia. It's an interesting term, but it means an intense fear of failure. It may cause you to put off or avoid any activity or scenarios that has the potential for an unsuccessful outcome, right? So someone with this condition may be scared to try new things, take risks, or embrace growth for fear of failure. I am assuming you guys can think of someone like that. Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone that you know, maybe it's someone in your family. But again, it's an extremely common challenge for people. Atikiphobia comes from the Greek word atikis, which means unfortunate. So I guess the fear of the unfortunate outcome, right? Now, people with atikiphobia may avoid situations where they see potential failures, such as exam or a job interview, right? So sometimes somebody will say, no, I don't even want to apply because they're just afraid, apply to a job because they're afraid of what may happen during the interview. They may be afraid of failed relationships, possible failure in a career, being disappointment to others. So for example, thinking that you, let's say your parents have higher expectations of you that you can meet, right? That can lead to fear of failure, right? And unfortunately, that fear of failure sometimes can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you're afraid to fail on the test, well, you just refuse to take the test altogether, right? So technically you didn't fail at it, you just didn't take it. But the ultimate outcome is that you failed the class, right? Because you didn't take the test. Now, dealing with fear of failure can frequently lead to a broad range of emotional issues and psychological problems such as shame, depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, poor performance at school, and definitely negative interactions with friends and family members. Because if you believe that, for example, you are not matching up to others, you begin to feel like you constantly somehow in this sort of lopsided relationship with people around you. So it can definitely affect your social experiences. Now, atikiphobia is different than what's called atelophobia. And you guys probably already know what atelophobia is. It's called perfectionism. We don't call it atelophobia. It's a more, I guess, less known term for it, but it's a proper term. Now, they have a lot of similarities in terms of how this looks behaviorally, in terms of how the person presents themselves, but the causes are different, right? The root cause is different. Perfection means you try to be flawless and have an intense focus on success. So it's those who obsess about, for example, getting A plus or 100% on a test. And so they have fear of not being perfect, right? Which may again look similar in terms of their behavior where they, let's say, procrastinate on something. But someone with atikiphobia actually focuses on failure and battles the feelings of that anxiety and an impending doom if they fail or when that will happen, right? So kind of different viewpoints. So atelophobia and atikiphobia are a bit different. Now, what can cause fear of failure? Well, there's a number of different reasons why. These are just some of them. And I also labeled them kind of nature versus nurture concept because some things can be biological in nature, you're born with, and others are more nurture related. So family history, we all know that if anxiety and depression runs in your family, it's very likely that the child may have anxiety or, let's say, depression. And so phobias are, or the fears or phobias are just under the umbrella of anxiety. And so that means that if, let's say, mom or dad had anxiety about something else, it's more likely that the child may develop a fear of failure just because of that biological connection, right? Doesn't mean it's a causation, it's just a positive correlation. Now, learned behavior is probably more relevant to us today. You may have grown up in an environment where people taught you that failure was unacceptable or that anything less than perfect was a failure, right? So imagine living under such conditions or growing up under such conditions could be very challenging to your self-esteem. Now, actually, I want to maybe pose a question to the audience. I won't see if you're raising your hands, so just unmute yourself and answer. Who can tell me for those on the spectrum, where do we see a lot of this possible learned behavior experiences where failure is unacceptable or where you're taught that you either succeed or fail? Can anybody guess? Sorry, because you guys all minimized. They can't see.
Oh, Aaron says school.
School.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so grades are, categorical in nature, right? So you either get an A or you get a failed. So those are categories, but in school with grades, there's at least B and C and D. So there's gradients technically, right? It's not just you succeeded or you failed. But I can see how somebody can really hyper focus on the fails and A's. Anywhere else?
Hannah says maybe socially if you get bullied.
Yes, we're going to come back to that in the last point of traumatic experiences. I'll come back to that. That's the correct answer for that one. Where else? What I was actually thinking about, and you guys probably heard of applied behavioral analysis, ABA. I'm assuming many of you guys have had that experience with ABA or heard about it. But just to go over it quickly, the concept is that it's based on the work of Dr. Eva Lovas from UCLA of discrete trials, which means that when you want somebody to change their behavior, you basically ask them to change the behavior. And then if they do something correctly, you give them a reward. If they don't do it correctly, you don't give them punishment because that wouldn't be nice. You just don't give them the reward, right? So the absence of the reward. So reward increases the behavior, absence of it decreases the behavior. So that creates two categories. Either you succeeded or you have failed in that particular discrete trial. Now, interestingly enough, ABA has been amazing for so many individuals on the spectrum from early age, teaching language, socialization, appropriate behaviors, so many different things, exposures to difficult situations. So absolutely necessary. However, as a side effect of that, what I see in a lot of young adults who went through it, they frequently end up in this feeling that the way that they live life, they either succeed or they fail, right? And because of that experience with countless hours of discrete trials. And so even though ABA is definitely an absolute must for a lot of people, we have to be aware of the possible side effect of this kind of categorical success versus failure that can actually lead to experiences with fear of failure. So that's more of a nurture, right? Because it's an experience rather than nature. Another point, a very important point that somebody mentioned about the social, bad social experiences. Well, that has to do with traumatic experiences in our lives, right? So if, for example, I have a different example on the screen, but in school, if you were constantly ridiculed or attacked by your peers for doing something that you're not even necessarily aware that you're doing, and so that could be really, really traumatic. And so the concept is that you either like them or you're not, right? They're not going into details and all the gray zones around that. And so again, that makes you feel that you're not able to match on to what your peers are, and therefore you're failing. And those traumatic experiences can definitely drive this greater fear of failure in general in life, right? Another point is that there's some comorbid phobias. So, for example, school phobia or fear of school can, be connected to atychiphobia or fear of failure. So, if you're afraid to go to school to, let's say, take a test or to deal with your peers, you can actually just have a connected fear of failure in school. Or someone with, let's say, germophobia may never feel like they're completely clean, right? They keep washing their hands, but they're never succeeding to the point where they actually clean. So if they're experiencing that can come together with the fear of failure as well. So that it's yet another nurture experience, right? So we can see that only one bullet point is about nature, so biological predisposition. The rest is about our experiences, and that's very important. The good thing about that is that there's a concept in behavioral psychology that everything that was learned can be unlearned, right? Just because you are acting this way right now doesn't mean that cannot be changed, right? And that's important for the next for the slides that we're going to talk about later. So how does it look when somebody is experiencing fear of failure? Well, people are usually afraid of performing simple tasks at work, home, school, right? So refusing to do even chores sometimes can be part of that, right? Because you don't want to fail at it, so I'd rather just avoid and not do it. And I have a little asterisk that's more, it shows you that I've seen this a lot in my population when I work with adults and kids on the spectrum. Somebody can be angry and irritable. Well, that can be in many different situations, right? Not just with fear of failure, but it does definitely happen a lot in those who are afraid to fail. Anxious about being judged by others, right? So I've seen that as an outcome of these traumatic social experiences that we talked about earlier, that one can have this fear that as soon as they will go out there and do something, somebody will judge them and they will fail to live up to their expectations, right? So panic attacks can be happening, being depressed or sad. Well, clearly, if you feel like you're failing or you're afraid to fail and you're just not engaging with life, you can't be having a happy existence, right? So being depressed is a natural result of that. Being pessimistic or having a negative outlook on life. Again, I've seen this a lot in the spectrum population, that a lot of times everything is viewed through this negative lens of negative outcomes, right? So pessimism is definitely a prevalent issue. Prone to procrastination if a task or activity seems challenging. So I'm sure parents have dealt with this with kids, and those who are young adults and teens who can attest to this yourselves, that you may frequently procrastinate to do something just because you don't necessarily want to fail at it, right? So it's common behavior. Unable to maintain relationships. Well, if you don't feel good about yourself or you don't feel like you can match up to other people, well, it's very unlikely that you're going to have a healthy relationship with someone with that kind of mindset. Unwilling to accept constructive criticism or help. I'm sure, again, that's something you guys have seen before. When people are, for example, I have a client, he was leaving for work and, his collar was just not down, it was up, and he's working in the office. And when his mom mentioned this, hey, by the way, buddy, your collar is up, just fix it. He felt like it was such an attack on his self that he overreacted and had almost a meltdown as in a reaction to that. But it wasn't about the collar. It was just about his view of self, being bad or being not as good as he should be. And that was driving that kind of a overreaction to the criticism that he experienced in that moment. So how do we sort of deal with the fear of failure? Well, one of the most common treatments for anxiety that has been now considered to be by FDA a gold standard treatment for anxiety is cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And this is the concept where a therapist really tries to help an individual to understand what thoughts they may have that may lead them on the path of this negative thinking and the fear of failure in this particular situation, right? The second part of cognitive behavioral therapy is the exposure therapy, where you actually have, once the person understands that their thought processes is problematic and they begin to change their thought process, you actually have to have them go out there and experience success, right? And that's what's called exposure therapy, when you expose somebody to something that they fear. Um, I had one of my clients who was really afraid of being judged by others. Ultimately, as the final step of exposure therapy, I had this young lady go to the mall, to the local mall, get herself a milkshake or whatever, I think that was, in a cup, and literally drop it in front of everybody on the floor, right? So it spilled all over the place, right? She thought that this would, like, she could literally like fall through the ground and disappear forever if that happens. Yet when she actually did that, all that she saw was that people were very helpful. They were like, oh my God, are you okay? They helped her clean it up. They actually gave her a free drink, replaced the drink, because she was right there next to the place where she bought it. So point being is that, but one had to go through this exposure therapy to be able to reassure yourself that what you have changed in your mind actually can be real in real life, right? In real world. And of course, medication definitely is helpful as well. So antidepressants, we talked about them before, they can be helpful for anxiety and depression. And because anxiety and depression are kind of existing together in this particular condition of fear of failure, then having something biological that helps you and gives you a little bit more push to be able to do some of the exposures, for example, is definitely of help, okay? So we talked about the thoughts, right? So the negative thoughts, for example, I will fail this exam. So what's the point? I'm not going to do it. So that's what's called the thought in CBT therapy, right? But there's something even more important and something that we should focus on today, because fear of failure is much more deep-seated than just that superficial thought that I will fail this test. And what it's in cognitive therapy, it's called schema. Schema is the root cause of everything. It's like a trunk of a tree, and from which multiple branches grow out, right? So if the trunk of the tree is problematic, or poisoned somehow, whatever if you want to call it, then the all of the branches are going to be affected by that as well, right? And even if you chop off one of the branches and allow the new one to grow back, it still is driven by this trunk of the tree, and so it will be yet another problematic branch. So that's why in cognitive therapy, ultimately, you want to get to the deep-rooted cause of the negative thoughts you have. And so, example of the deep thematic thoughts that are related to that schema, for example, I have failed, I will fail, or I am inadequate in comparison to others, right? So these are very common ones. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up, because I want you guys to see how it's relevant to the feelings of depression that is associated with this fear of failure. People don't just feel fear and anxiety from fear of failure, they also feel depressed. Why? Well, if I have failed, then I am worthless, right? If I will fail, well, then it's hopeless. I can't change anything, right? And if I'm inadequate, well, I can't even get help from other people around this because I don't know how to do that either. So 3 pillars of depression is hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness. And when all 3 are present, someone will definitely feel depressed. Yes. So as I said, those 3 pillars of hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness is what creates a depressive state. And so in the schema of failure, the fear of failure and projection of failure will definitely have at least 2 out of 3 pillars present. And so it can make somebody fairly depressed. And people, usually have these very harsh self-deprecating statements about themselves, such as being I'm stupid, or I'm unsuccessful, or I'm inept, or like lack talent. And these labels carry a lot of negative connotation to it. So when you label yourself as such, you begin to sort of reinforce the idea of yourself being worthless, right? And again, very problematic. Now, in children, there's some childhood situations that can actually lead to that development of the schema of that root cause. So for example, when you're very young and you receive a lot of ridicule or mocking or constant criticism from caregivers, for example, or your peers, that could lead to the feeling of these inadequacies, right? Or for example, if a caregiver places or a teacher places an impossible demand on a child and the child inevitably fails, they learn that they cannot succeed and therefore failure is coming. So for example, if let's say a parent says, okay, I'm going to have you learn all 50 states in the next 15 minutes or next half an hour, for a young child, that could be really, really difficult to do or almost impossible. And so if it's a true expectation, that can set somebody on the path of developing this true sort of deeply seated cognitive schema of failure. And we talked about repeated bullying and scorn by your peers can definitely have a traumatic effect on you as well, and solidify this this concept from, for example, earlier I said that you are inadequate in comparison to others, right? So unfortunately, this continuous negative feedback in children will lead to what's called internalization. You begin to believe what people are saying about you or calling you, right? And that belief becomes an ingrained cognitive schema that I'm a failure, right? And if I'm a failure, well, then I will fail, right? And I don't want to constantly experience failure, so therefore I'd rather avoid it if I can, right? Alternatively, also interestingly enough, the same schema can develop in care if the caregiver is actually acting in the kind of like almost like overprotective helicopter kind of parenting style, where they're not allowing the child to fail and learn and develop self-esteem and mastery of their world, where the child does not learn to fail and improve as a normal part of life. It's okay to fail. You guys, for example, who play video games or you're supposed to fail. You're not supposed to pass the game right away. That would be ridiculous, right? But you keep trying, you get better and you develop better skills and you pass the level and you move on to the next one, right? Where you will fail again, right? But you're not afraid of it because you're learning that that is the normal experience, right? But if you are never allowed to fail and you're overprotected and everything is done for you, well, then there's no learning that failure is a normal part of the process. Now, in adults with the failure schema, they usually act in a different way. They just tend to quit while they're ahead, right? So I'm not going to get a job, for example, that is high-paying job with a lot of pressure because I don't want to fail at that. So I'm just going to get a simple job somewhere else, maybe get paid much less, and at least I won't have to deal with failure because I can definitely do this job. And so unfortunately, we do see that in the statistic that individuals on the spectrum are underpaid and underperform in comparison to what they should be able to achieve, right? In terms of their cognitive abilities, IQ, right? So to a degree, this fear of failure or not wanting to deal with extreme situations where they can fail definitely leads to, for example, somebody with a, who finishes at a UCI with English degree, instead of continuing to push themselves to look for English for that major related jobs, will, let's say, settle for something that's definitely below their capacity, like working at a menial job somewhere, right? There's other things, of course, can feed into this, but from the failure schema perspective, that's the behavior we would see. Okay. So again, the concept of the adult may feel stupid or incompetent definitely is solidifies by the time somebody's an adult, if that's what they feel about themselves, right? And we talked about how somebody can be extremely sensitive to the feedback. That could be a huge detriment at a workplace, for example, right? If you overreact every time the manager says that you've done something wrong or you need to do something better, that can cause you to lose a job, right? Same thing in relationships, romantic relationships, where you have to be able to be open to feedback. Sometimes you are not, and that can cause friction or breakup in a relationship as well. What we see also in adults is that a lot of times adults do what's called ignoring the positives, right? So you only focus on the negative things that are going on in your life and you kind of dismiss everything positive thing that occurs, right? So but if you actually take a look realistically at what's going on, you will see that you are succeeding on a daily basis, on multiple times a day, maybe hundreds of times a day if you want to really break it down. And the failures only happen rarely, but because positives are dismissed and the focus is on the negatives, that's not part of the calculation, right? Now, and then the concept of self-comparison to others, right, or feeling incompetent, the way that it also correlates to individuals on the spectrum is sometimes the awareness of the diagnosis itself can play a role. And the way that I see it play out in my, with my clients is that somebody will say, well, I'm on a spectrum, so I have a broken brain, for example, right? So what's the point of trying? I'm not even going to go on this date because who would want somebody with a broken brain, right? And there's so many wrong things about that statement, and that's completely unfair and judgmental and incorrect statement about self. But yet that is what's driving that individual's behavior, right? So this sometimes the awareness of diagnosis, if you don't fully understand the diagnosis and don't see how you can actually be extremely successful being on the spectrum, will play a role in this fear of failure. Okay. So there's three most common maladaptive ways that people are dealing with fear of failure. Okay. Or failure schema, as we talked about. Now, most common one, of course, is avoidance, right? So you're avoiding any situation that could potentially lead to failure. And so it may look like somebody is kind of skirting away responsibilities, refusing to take on challenges or finish tasks. And most commonly is procrastinating, right? Procrastinating to start the work, procrastinating to apply to college, to apply to a job, procrastinating on starting dating, whatever that may be, right? It's just avoidance of the failure itself, driven by the failure schema. Now, less common one, but still, top three, I should have probably put it as the last one, but is overcompensation. That is a little bit more rare, right? And when somebody is so aware of their deficiencies or their challenges, or they see themselves as a complete failure, they actually try to act in a completely opposite way, so that would never be seen by other people. So, for example, somebody who's willing to do anything and everything for a person who's just willing to hang out with them, just to go to the movies with them, and they're willing to pay for it, they're willing to drive them there, they're willing to do everything, go above and beyond. I will pay for your ticket to Disneyland, just hang out with me because I'm such a nice friend, I'm such a good person, I will do anything, right? And that is what's called overcompensating for this true feeling about yourself, that you actually are not like that, right? And so they try not to show that in this overcompensation kind of way. And the last one is definitely related more to depression, is surrendering, right? When you kind of capitulate to the idea that you're not good, um, they just, they just maybe even if they're going to take a test, they'll take the test, but they'll do it in haphazard kind of way, or they will not study enough, even though they know they need to study enough. But it basically leads to the outcome of failing on the test, and that reinforces the same schema. Kind of like, yeah, I knew I'm going to fail, so here I am. I did fail. So, right, it becomes the circular thinking behind that. So how do we deal with the fear of failure? Well, what it does require is we need to address the schema on two different levels. So you first have to face the fear of failure, right? So, and the second one is you need to refute the idea that the failure is inevitable. Okay, people, if they believe that I'm going to fail regardless, that's going to be very difficult for them to get out of this fear of failure state. So, and by the way, this is something that could have been there for a person for many years. If it started in childhood, we're talking about deeply ingrained ideas, and so it'll take some time to change. It's not going to be something that you can just snap out of, but it can be done. So facing the fear means that some form or recognition that sometimes we fail, and that is just the normal part of life and is not catastrophic ending, right? So it's not a big deal to fail, right? Refuting the idea that the failure is inevitable means that really understanding on the gut level, you truly believe inside that it's possible to succeed in some things that sometimes, regardless of others may say, or regardless of what you may think even sometimes, right? So you will succeed. It's the matter is when, right? So a big part of the process of sort of dealing with the fear of failure is what's called cognitive restructuring. And we've done previously many presentations on CBT, and cognitive restructuring has been one of the main ways you do that. But it is a little bit actually different than what we talked about in a lecture on positive psychology. It's not the same as positive thinking, right? So for example, if in positive psychology, somebody would say, well, you know what, just say to yourself, I will pass the test, right? And that would be optimistic, versus something like, I won't pass the test, and that is a fairly pessimistic view. Well, in reality, cognitive restructuring requires what's called realistic view. Not optimistic, not pessimistic, but rather realistic view of what may happen. And of course, the best of the best would be what's called optimistic realism. So I hope for the best, but I'm being very realistic about the situation. So for example, I'm going to fail this test and it will be awful would be pessimistic. But switching it to something like it's possible that I'll fail this test. But if I do, I'll deal with it, right? It's not the end of the world. I'll be able to maybe retake the test, maybe study more, maybe make up in some other ways with extra points on tests and stuff like that, maybe extra assignments or extra credit, right? So that would be more realistic way of looking at it, right? And of course, optimistic realism would be to say, you know what, I've studied enough, so I think I'm going to do well on this test because I've studied enough. And even if I don't get the grade that I want, it's okay, not a big deal. I'll just learn how to approach it differently next time, right? So as I said, we have to sort of work on the schema in three different levels of thoughts, feelings, and actions, right? The way that CBT works is that we believe that our thoughts lead to how we feel, and how, based on how we feel, our actions proceed, right? So I guess as an example, if somebody, if somebody rejected me at school, and I think, wow, I'm just a total weirdo because they said that I'm a weirdo, well, I'll feel sad and upset about that, right? And if I do feel sad and upset about that, I definitely don't want to experience that again. So I might not want to go socialize anytime soon, right? So this is just for you guys to actually to read if you want to look back at these slides, but these are specific examples of what a therapist would do, for example, with somebody who's trying to cognitively restructure their fear of failure, right? The scheme of fear of failure. I'm not going to go into them, but you can read over them. You can actually even try that at home. Some of them require, for example, journaling, right? And if you follow this example, that could be actually helpful to you, because Judy likes when I give specific tools that people can walk away with. Well, this is specifically something you can try at home. Any of these four, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 exercises would definitely be something to try. All right. No questions, Judy, so far?
I didn't see any in the chat. Let me look again.
Okay. All right,
Not
good.
yet.
Good. All right, now let's talk about fear of failure, and more specifically for those on the spectrum. Now that we talked about the general concepts of fear of failure, so we definitely know that anxiety is much more common in those on the spectrum, right? The statistics show that almost 50% of people on the spectrum do experience anxiety, and that is way higher than the neurotypical counterparts. Okay. I don't think that includes all of the phobias, because phobias are really common. Like, do you know how many people are afraid of spiders, for example? I bet you it's billions. So at this point. And so, so I don't think they looked specifically at phobias, but more sort of serious anxieties are definitely more common for those on the spectrum. But individuals on the spectrum experience anxiety in a little bit different way because of some of the challenges that come along with that. So, for example, you probably know about the concept of theory of mind, of being able to take the perspective of other people, right? And we know that sometimes for those on the spectrum, that could be a challenge unless it's practiced over and over again. From childhood to adulthood. And by the way, you can get better at that. So it's a challenge if you don't practice. But difficulty recognizing other people's emotions of self and others, it can lead to more traumatic experiences in socialization. It can also lead to all kinds of labels of self not being good enough, not being as good as others, right? So you can see how that can feed into this fear of, let's say, social failure, right? Sensory sensitivities can also play a role, not directly, but indirectly, where someone, if, for example, I'm not good with overwhelming sounds, and I'm supposed to go to this conference and somehow succeed in getting to know people, or if I'm working like to get contracts and get connections, well, I can't, because there's so many people talking at the same time that I can like block them out. So the sensory issue may play a role in, for example, difficulties connecting with others because you're not able to focus on what you need to do, right? So sensory sensitivities can be an additional issue with that. But one of the biggest issues that I've seen, especially lately, is the difficulty with uncertainty, right? For those on the spectrum, not knowing how something will be, being able to predict how it's going to turn out, can be an overwhelming challenge, because your mind goes into 5 million directions, and all of them are possibilities of how this is going to go, and you just become overwhelmed by thinking about all of this, and then you just want to say, you know what, I can't be thinking about all of this, I'm just going to not do this because this is just too much, right? So this difficulty with uncertainty definitely leads to the concept that I can't do this, and if I can't do this, I'm trying to avoid failure, right? Because if I do it, I will fail. And the last one, performance anxiety is definitely there. And we already talked about ABA and how that's relevant. So for those who did a lot of ABA when they were younger, well, it's all about performance, right? Because you want to meet your goals, right? You got to do well on each discrete trial and get your rewards. And if that's what you've been taught to do, well, you're going to be very anxious whether or not you're doing well all the time, right? And so not to deal with that, and fear of failure develops, and one begins to avoid and escape those situations as much as possible. Like, for example, I have a young man, he's in 10th grade. Every time he passes by his parents, he looks them in the eyes to assess whether or not they're upset with him or they're happy with him, because that will determine if he's doing good or bad, right? Again, this black and white thinking causes him to feel like he's constantly at a point of something bad happening, because he's not sure if he's doing good or bad. So that black and white thinking really gets in the way. Okay. So some of the things that you want to try to do to address the fear of failure in those with AD is, number one is you got to utilize the aforementioned CBT and schema work we talked about. So everything we talked about earlier definitely applies. It's helpful. You start with more concrete things to help a person kind of get a control over what it means to have fear of failure, and then you begin to go further in a more abstract and more general terms. But if possible, one of the most important things you got to do is to address uncertainty, right? As I just mentioned, uncertainty causes severe anxiety in people. And if you can address the uncertainty, you can see significant improvement. So reduce uncertainty by ensuring that where it's possible, individuals with ASD know what to expect. So give the person as much information as possible to satisfy their need to understand what will happen, because then they can predict what will happen, and it's easier to engage in that, right? So reducing anxiety related to uncertainty through very gradual exposure to uncertain situations, right? Now, that means that if it's not possible to give all of the information to make it less uncertain, at least start exposing the person to situations they're unfamiliar with. So, for example, I have some clients who wouldn't even want to try new foods, right? They you know what? I don't want to try new foods. I don't know. I've had bad experiences with it, so I'm just not doing it. I'm only going to eat my pizza and chicken nuggets and whatever, the basic things that I grew up eating. Well, through small steps of exposure, you can slowly begin to expose a person to something that they're uncertain about, to try new food that they might have heard, you might have seen a picture of, but never actually tasted. So this will definitely also help with them feeling like this uncertainty is being decreased. Okay, and I'm using food as a simple example, but as you can imagine, it can be applied to many different situations. Okay, so the black and white or all or nothing thinking, it's one of the most common cognitive distortions that people experience, right? So either succeed or fail. Neurotypical people have issues with this. Individuals on the spectrum have even more of a challenge with this, because concrete thinking is a normal cognitive pattern for someone on the spectrum. So, but getting out of that is essential in order to not have this intense fear of failure. You have to see the grays, right? You have to see the gradients in between black and white, right? And so if you can learn how to do that, you will see how slowly a person will feel more comfortable with trying things without fear of failure. Yeah. Attention to detail can be a problem too, right? So actually, I think even in the clip earlier, young lady mentioned that she has great attention to detail, and that helped her succeed in her animation career. Well, that's true. That can be great in that particular situation when it's focused on her career and it pays off there. But if you start looking at every little detail of everything that you're surrounded by, you can become overwhelmed really quickly, right? So it's okay to have, let's say, misspellings or mistakes or some flaws here and there, so that you're not concerned with this perfectionism. It's either perfect or it's a failure of the experience, right? Social issues, definitely teaching social skills is essential, right? So the more that you are comfortable socializing with others, the more you can use your theory of mind, and that has to be infused in the treatment as well. The more you'll be able to be comfortable, right? If I know what I'm supposed to do when I'm going to go to a party and I kind of have an idea of how it's done, it's much easier for me to envision a positive outcome rather than expecting a complete failure, right? But the reason why frequently we see the reverse of that for those on the spectrum is that socialization doesn't always produce the same amount of reward as you would expect. For example, in neurotypical people, but there's definitely high risk potential for high risk potential, right? So high risk potential for being, let's say, bullied or ostracized versus very low social reward creates an uncomfortable formula for someone, and they'd rather not at that point, right? Why engage? Perseverations can be something that could be a problem as well, and so addressing that is important because I mentioned pacing here. You probably have seen either someone pacing or you pace yourselves. A lot of my clients, what they describe is when they pace, they actually think. They think and they keep replaying certain social situations that they encountered, and trying either to think about how they can do it differently next time or what went wrong, and kind of going over it over and over and over again, unfortunately, leads to this hyper focus on the failed event or event where you didn't succeed. And so this kind of perseveration actually can play against you, right? And that could be a problem. Now, one of the things that does help is what's called the tapping technique. And it's more from EMDR practice, which is was developed more for PTSD treatments. So that helps you kind of get out of the perseveration mode, where you literally tap yourself on the by the shoulder to kind of bring yourself back into reality. Okay, and of course, communication difficulties also something that that can be sort of, like I said, we've talked about this before, play a role in the social challenges and later fear of failure. Okay. Again, any questions while I take a drink? No. Okay.
Yeah, there are some, but I think they kind of are similar and probably fit in the discussion portion of the.
Okay.
It's not a clarification on anything.
Okay. Now, also some tools for the parents who are here. Some of the things that you can help your child with. One of the most important things is to sort of constantly remind them of the truth, right? But it has to be done in a relaxed, positive, compassionate, and most importantly, consistent way. So it's not about being harsh. It's about showing that, hey, even if you didn't do as well, you will succeed. I'm sure, like, all you have to do is sort of try and maybe address this and here, but you're going to do well, right? This unconditional sort of positive regard towards your child and their ability to improve. Even in sessions, whenever I'm asking anyone to do something that they're uncomfortable with, I have to instill an air of belief that it can be done. And it has to be, like I said, in this very relaxed and positive way, like acknowledging the challenge, but yet showing that success is definitely possible. Okay. Also need to define certain things and be careful with the way that you phrase things. Like, for example, you guys heard this, the saying, you don't need to be the best, just try your best, right? That's good. It's a great suggestion. You kind of get away from the competition with others and kind of focus on your best effort. But unfortunately, to someone on the spectrum, that may mean that my best effort would be if I was sitting here and studying nonstop for like 8 hours. And that just sounds horrific. And I just don't want to do that. Right? So it has to be, again, within the frame of realistic efforts, right? And sometimes you may have to show what that realistic effort would look like, right? You may have to help the child to get away from the extremes, like I have to study for 8 hours a day in order to be successful at school, right? That's unrealistic, right? And we were talking, the third one specifically talks about that. sometimes making something, more concrete, right? So there's a lot of visual learners out there, and just helping a person see their progress in a concrete kind of way would definitely help them. You definitely need to relay the concept that learning is a process. It's just not an event itself. There's no completion of that. It continues on as we go. Therefore, there's no failure, right? As you are learning, you're just slowly improving whatever it is that you're doing without a particular end goal. Because if once there's a particular end goal, then there's a possibility of not reaching that goal, and someone can be afraid that they will fail. But if there is no end goal, it's just a process, well, then it's easier to engage in that. Be an example and model making mistakes and getting things wrong. There's an example here of a dad who was very sort of stressed about his mistakes that he was doing while he is working in sales. And, his kids could feel that and see that at home, right? Parents, you have to know that kids at any age will pick up on your anxiety, pick up on your stress, and they're actually watching you very carefully, because that kind of gauges their emotional response. So once we worked with the dad, and he was actually able to deliberately make some mistakes on purpose, and then kind of laugh about it, everyone at home felt that there was this decrease in anxiety and tension of performance, right? And I already gave you an example of somebody who dropped their ice cream shake on the floor, right? Just laugh about it. Not a big deal. It's just a milkshake that dropped, right? But you have to sometimes model that and show that, hey, I can fail too. I'm not perfect, right? Um, you got to make sure that you are not accidentally reinforcing child's perfectionism. Now, this is very important, because once somebody succeeds, it's very easy to just shower praise at them and just give them rewards and all of that. Well, again, that in itself may accidentally reinforce the perfectionism, because you just give a ton of social reward or actual reward for success versus actually engaging in the process. So encouragement is about the process, the journey, right? About the process, the journey, whereas praise is about the results. Praise for the results is inappropriate. It's better to give rewards for the process itself. Somebody was trying, somebody was studying, somebody was learning. Doesn't matter if they got a C. I always tell my daughter that, you know what, if you get a C in class, but you were studying, you actually sat down and studied, you have succeeded in my book. I don't care that you got A, B, or C. If you actually tried to sit down and do sort of and learn the material and practice whatever, you have succeeded. And you got to give reward for that, for the actual behavior, rather than the grade, right? Does that make sense? And of course, you need to be patient and make sure you are not falling prey to the same cognitive distortions. So this is for the parents to take home. Now, Judy, I think this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's extremely important, because I think we've seen this as a major problem for a lot of parents of young adults on the spectrum. That is the concept of the fear of failure manifesting itself in the failure to launch, right? And what is failure to launch? Well, it's a non-judgmental way to describe the frustration and concern families feel when a young adult seems unable to move forward and achieve the major task of life expected for their age, right? It's like a lot of times people feel like they've been stuck, right? And so I know there was a Getting Unstuck lecture, I think, not so long ago, but just for those who might have not heard about this, and just to see the connection to the fear of failure. So, like for example, we see the young adults sometimes are not obtaining higher education because they're the fear of failure of doing well at a university, for example, or it might be too difficult and I won't be able to match up to the expectations, right? Finding a job or career, developing a sense of identity, learning to self-regulate, forming intimate relationships with others outside the family. Moving out of the family home. All of these are some of the behaviors that are connected to this extreme reluctance to engage with life. Because if you don't engage with life, you don't fail. Because there's no technically failure in that, because you didn't try. But that is just a cognitive distorted way of looking at it. right? Because if you don't engage, you're actually failing at that point. Symptoms of failure to launch. So you can see that the adults will be easily frustrated or discouraged, low levels of persistence, lacks accountability or reluctant to take responsibility, right? A lot of times I have to talk to my clients about independence, right? They all want to be independent, but they don't want to be responsible for what that, for having that kind of independence, right? Because responsibility is connected to outcomes. And so if there's a fear of failure, they will take some independence, but they don't want to be responsible. Or they might not take independence altogether, right? If they can avoid it. So there's some exaggerated sense of entitlement and narcissism that can be sort of involved too. But remember that overcompensation we talked about, right? So some people swing into that state of that almost looks like entitlement and narcissism. That's to compensate for how they truly feel about themselves. Lack of basic life skills, of course, is a problem. Feelings of extreme highs and lows, moodiness, excessive anger, sadness, irritability, unusual eating and sleeping patterns. We've seen young adults be night owls, right? It's like Batman, they only operate at night. They're asleep during the day. And that's to avoid feeling like they have failed. A lot of them will say, well, I don't have to face people and be reminded of what I don't do right? So I'm just going to avoid and try to live this nocturnal lifestyle. Of course, hopelessness about the future, withdrawal from friends and social life, inappropriate or excessive use of alcohol or drugs. Again, not as much in those on the spectrum, but we do see some of that popping up as well, especially in those who are higher functioning. We see some of that becoming an issue as a way to deal with these feelings. And of course, over dependence on electronic devices such as smartphones and gaming systems. Times sometimes it resembles addiction, but to understand it is that it's the only way to let the time pass, right? So while you're avoiding everything else, while you're not engaging with life and you're failing to launch, at least the time is passing. And this is, by the way, when, for example, drugs like, addictive things like electronics and, for example, drugs like weed or marijuana can actually affect the time passing, right? The faster the time passes, the less you're exposed to reality. And so that's why we see sometimes these behaviors as part of failure to launch, based on the fear of failure. But rather than asking why so many young adults with ADHD actually experience failure to launch, it's very important just to focus on how do you help them get unstuck. And the three most important things that that's been shown in research and in practice have been working is you build social skills, right? So they can have more positive social experiences, can actually go out there and experience and be exposed to positive social interactions, build the network, and feel accepted. Because once you feel accepted by your peers or by other people, it challenges those core thoughts that you are, you're not good or you have failed, or you are a failure, right? It challenges those labels, that experience. Also, we got to challenge the black and white thinking, because that is the concreteness of thought is definitely, and rigidity around that is going to keep you sort of stuck. And so if you're going to get unstuck, you have to begin to create some flexibility. Right. The best question that I always ask people about black and white thinking is, and you can do that for yourself, or you can do this with your kids or your relatives. You can ask, so name me something that is absolutely black and white in this world. One thing, other than laws of physics. We all know where the sun comes up and stuff like that and goes down, or energy is neither created nor destroyed. But point being is that something that we experience on a day-to-day basis in our world that is black and white. And the answer is there's not anything like that. I can find gradients in almost 100%, well, I would say 99.9999% of the experiences we have and things that surround. So black and white thinking is a definitive distortion of reality, right? And we've got to be as realistic as possible. And let's teach them day-to-day living skills that will give them the feeling of independence, control, self-sufficiency, being able to actually go out there and do things so they can feel like they can succeed based on the skills that they have. I use this example. If somebody gives me a free motorcycle right now and says, here you go, Alex, here are the keys, go have fun. I'll be excited, but I'm not going to get on that motorcycle. Why? Because I don't know how to ride a motorcycle. I don't have the skills. And so I'm going to avoid getting on the motorcycle because I don't have the skills. But if somebody can teach me, then I can take whatever the first steps towards actually riding that motorcycle, right? As an example. So, Albert Einstein said that failure is success in progress, right? So this goes back to the idea that as you're trying things, you're actually succeeding, right? And so my favorite phrase that was not based on Albert Einstein, but just on my personal experiences is failure is not in the process of trying and not succeeding to achieve your goal, but rather than standing still and not trying to change your life situation. Right. So I've said this many, many times to those who are stuck, because being stuck in that cryostasis and just in the cocoon that you've created for yourself and allowing time to pass, that is the true failure. Not engaging with life is a failure. Trying things and not necessarily reaching that ultimate success point is actually success, because you are doing something to improve your life, you're doing something to improve yourself, you are learning from the process of trying. Okay. And lots of people have asked me to sort of kind of say what I think is the formula for success in life. And I don't know, I think I coined that phrase, but maybe not, I don't know. I think so. I don't think I read it anywhere, but anyways, so I always say that a simple formula for success in life is success equals to you have to learn how to do what you don't want to do. Okay, so you want to look good, you got to go to the gym. You don't always want to go to the gym, but you go to the gym, right? And then you're going to be healthier, you're going to look better. If you want to, let's say, even work in animation, there will be times where you will tirelessly have to work to create animation so that you can be an animator. But you have to do what you don't want to do, is put in all these hours and practicing and getting your skill to perfection, right? And so if you learn how to do things you don't want to do, you will begin to your path to success. Okay, you guys probably remember Kobe Bryant, that unfortunately passed away, but he always said that he wasn't anything special. He didn't say that he was some kind of a gift. He has an amazing gift, physical gift from God, like LeBron James. He said LeBron James actually has an amazing gift from God. His body, his strength, his speed, agility, all of that. But Kobe was just as good, because he said that every morning at 5:30 a.m. he was at the gym practicing every morning, and he was putting in countless hours into that. And he said, I didn't want to do that. That's not what I wanted to do, but I knew that that's what I needed to do to be successful in life. So that directly goes into this very simple formula for success. Okay. All right. We're now at the end of the presentation. Sorry, guys, this was like a lot, but I just wanted to get through all the slides in time.
You do have some questions.
All right,
So
good.
let the questions begin.